Okay, so this is the Bible study for First Samuel chapter 22. And we're going to overlap just a little bit the text that we finished with last week and kind of just build on that concept because last week we did the end of chapter 21 and the first 5 verses of chapter 22. But there's, I think, some pretty significant things that we're going to talk about there. So we're going to go ahead and stay with that for this week as we move forward. So the text says, David left Gath and escaped to the cave of Adullam. When his brothers and his father's household heard about it, they went to him, down to him there. All those who were in distress or in debt or discontented gathered around him, and he became their commander. About 400 men were with him. From there, David went to Mizpah in Moab and said to the king of Moab, would you let my father and mother come and stay with you until I learn what God will do for me? So he left them with the king of Moab, and they stayed with him as long as David was in the stronghold. But the prophet Gad said to David, do not stay in the stronghold. Go into the land of Judah. So David left and went to the forest of Hereth. Now Saul heard that David and his men had been discovered, and Saul was seated, spear in hand, under the tamarisk tree on the hill of Gibeah, with all his officials standing at his side. He said to them, listen, men of Benjamin, will the son of Jesse give all of you fields and vineyards? Will he make all of you commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds? Is that why you have all conspired against me? No one tells me when my son makes a covenant with the son of Jesse. None of you is concerned about me or tells me that my son has incited my servant to lie and wait for me as he does today. But Doug the Edomite, who was standing with Saul's officials, said, I saw the son of Jesse come to Ahimelech, son of Ahitub, at Nob. Ahimelech inquired of the Lord for him. He also gave him provisions and the sword of Goliath, the Philistine. Then the king sent for the priest Ahimelech, son of Ahitub, and all the men of his family who were priests at Nob, and they all came to the king. Saul said, listen now, son of Ahitub. Yes, my lord, he answered. Saul said to him, why have you conspired against me, you and the son of Jesse, giving him bread and a sword and inquiring of God for him, so that he has rebelled against me and lies in wait for me as he does today? Ahimelech answered the king, who of all your servants is as loyal as David, the king's son-in-law, captain of your bodyguard, and highly respected in your household? Was that day the first time I inquired of God for him? Of course not. Let not the king accuse your servant or any of his father's family, for your servant knows nothing at all about this whole affair. But the king said, you will surely die, Ahimelech, you and your whole family. Then the king ordered the guards at his side, turn and kill the priests of the Lord, because they too have sided with David. They knew he was fleeing, yet they did not tell me. But the king's officials were unwilling to raise a hand to strike the priests of the Lord. The king then ordered Doug, you turn and strike down the priests. So Doug the Edomite turned and struck them down. That day he killed 85 men who wore the linen ephod. He also put to the sword Nob, the town of the priests, with its men and women, its children and infants, and its cattle, donkeys, and sheep. But one son of Ahimelech, son of Ahitub, named Abiathar, escaped and fled to join David. He told David that Saul had killed the priests of the Lord. Then David said to Abiathar that day, when Doug the Edomite was there, I knew he would be sure to tell Saul, I am responsible for the death of your whole family. Stay with me, don't be afraid. The man who wants to kill you is trying to kill me too. You will be safe with me. All right, so there's a lot that happens there. And remember that you can download PDF copies of this Bible study at www.abqnaz.org/alive. Number one on our Bible study says, what happened in our last Bible study? A, David fled again further. B, David pretended to be insane because Achish's servant recognized him and knew the song that the women would sing, the same one that made Saul angry. That's true also. C, David fled to a cave, and his family and all those who were in distress or in debt or discontented gathered around him, and he became their commander. That's true, and we reread that text at the beginning of today. D, David found a safe place for his family, and that's true. Number two, do you think there was, and that's the wrong there, I know, was any significance in the people who were drawn to David and followed him? Yes or no? Why were these people drawn to David? So I think yes. The people that were drawn to David were discontented. And what does that mean? It means they weren't happy, they weren't comfortable, they weren't okay with the current situation of the kingdom. Now, whether that was because they knew Saul was doing wrong, or whether that was because they just didn't like whatever government, they could have been criminals for all we know. People who had truly done the wrong thing. And that's the reason they weren't happy with the government. They were discontented. So why were these people drawn to David? Because David had a similar problem. They were kin. They had common enemy. If you know the saying, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So they had a problem with what was going on in the kingdom. David had a problem because David was an enemy of the kingdom. Saul had made him an enemy. So they were drawn to David, not necessarily because David was of God or anointed, not necessarily because David did what was right, but because David was an outcast in the kingdom, and so were they. So the next question says, who was and is drawn to Jesus most? And the answer ultimately is often the same people. We don't have a tendency to go to Jesus when everything's going for us, when we when our current circumstances align and make it advantageous to be who we are, where we are. We usually go to Jesus. We usually turn to Jesus when what's going on in our life is no good. When what's happening in our current life is makes us feel outcast or uncared for, or I think we talked about this a little bit in the closing time last week, that Jesus when he called his disciples, he called people who had already been overlooked or rejected by religious society of the time, and even the whole kingdom of Israel, really. The third part says, who is drawn to you? So, I saw a Facebook post that said something to the effect of, it was playing on the political, slogans, and it said, make youth pastors weird again, or something like that. But the idea was, it had pictures of youth pastors with skinny jeans and V-necks and scarves and whatever, flat brimmed hats, whatever the in thing for teenagers to do is. These pictures of teen pastors trying to be relevant to their teenagers and to seem cool. And I guess the point of it was, if people are drawn to you because you're cool, then what happens when you have to say something that's uncool, because it's the word of God? And so it was kind of playing on this idea. And I get that we're trying to become all things to all men, like Paul said. I get that we're trying to um, sort of connect with the dominant culture in a way that doesn't look so weird, that people don't understand that we're there for their good and things like that. I get, I'm all for um, reaching unchurched people in a way that they can understand and connect with, rather than maybe being weird off the bat. But here's the challenge: is if our model of ministry is attractional, in that we're trying to um, look attractional to the people that don't love God, then when it comes time to speak the word of God, it is often unpopular. And it's true, and in that way it can attract people, because people are searching for truth, where in a world that's willing to lie to them. I totally get that. But often what we say when we speak the word of God is unpopular. And when we get used to trying to draw people to us because we're pretty and cool, then we will have trouble. Sometimes there will be temptation to not speak the word of God, because it isn't always pretty and cool. And so I think there's something to this idea, that David, the people that were drawn to him were the people that were outcasts, and Jesus, the people that were drawn to him were outcasts. They were the people that did, and that is contrasted in this passage, and we're about to get to this, so I'm going to give away a little bit of where we're going, but that's contrasted or made really clear when by what Saul says when he's trying to get when he's kind of berating his officials for you know um, being on David's side, if you will, or consorting with the enemy. And he says, "Oh, is the son of Jesse going to give you houses and positions and rewards? He can't. He's not the king. I'm the king. I'm the one that can give that to you." Which also contrasts with what we talked about a few weeks ago with Jonathan, who was begging for mercy from David, even though Jonathan was of the king's household and David was outcast. Jonathan could have used his own authority to hold danger or fear over David, but he didn't. Instead, he recognized what place God had placed David in, and instead begged for mercy, sort of conceding that God's will would be done, and David would someday be in that authority position, so he needed to treat him like he was today. Whereas Saul is definitely today holding things over his officials that he has authority to give them. And so then what that tells us is that the people that went to David were people that, for whatever reason, didn't care about the things Saul had to offer, or had already been outcast because of the things that Saul had to offer. They were not in the in crowd. They were not in the in group. Those people who were in the in group with Saul had constant temptation to give in to what Saul had to offer instead of doing the will of God. And that's kind of what we're going to sit in for this text. Number 3 says, what does the prophet Gad tell David in verse 5? He tells him, don't stay in the stronghold, go out there. We talked about that, I think, a little bit last week, so I won't sit there too much. Number four, what is the significance of the prophet telling David to leave the stronghold and go into the land of Judah in verse 5? A, he had to trust God for his protection rather than his position and ability to defend it, which would have been his position in the stronghold. So, in some ways, his position in the stronghold um, was a place where he was protected and more sort of on the inside, maybe in a different kingdom, but in the end group, and he might be tempted to hold on to that um, safety. B, he had to go out into the land where people were trying to kill him, absolutely, where all this is happening and where Saul's speaking to his men about this. C, God was calling him to a place of opposition and difficulty, absolutely true. D, separation and safety were not God's will. That's true. And E, probably most importantly, David was obedient. And so, what's most significant about this is that when God said it, David did it instead of giving into the temptation of comfort, safety, complacency, reward, whatever, all the things that now we're going to talk about the temptations that Saul's officials went through. Number five, what does Saul tell his officials when he finds David has been discovered, according to verses 6-8? He says, with his spear in his hand, by the way, and he's been known to throw that at people. He says, "Listen, will the son of Jesse give all of you fields and vineyards?" So he's saying, "I've got the authority to give you things. I can make you commanders. I can give you everything that you want. So who are you going to follow here? Who are you going to side with?" The second part says, how does Doug respond to what Saul is offering in verses 9-10? So it says, of course, his officials were not swayed. How does Doug respond in verses 9-10? Doug, the Edomite, who was standing with Saul's officials, said, I saw the son of Jesse come to Ahimelech, son of Ahitub, at Nob. Ahimelech inquired of the Lord for him, and he has given him. So, in other words, everybody else is on the outside here. Saul is accusing everybody of siding with David. Doug raises his hand. Not me, not me. He wants to be the teacher's pet. He wants to be the favorite. He says, I saw David over at the priest's house. I saw the priest inquire of God and give him a sword. Because he's like, hey, I'm going to be rewarded for all this. The third part says, would you be swayed by the material things that Saul is offering? I want to put in a second part of that question that says, now tell the truth. Because I know everybody in Bible says, no, I do the right thing. But I wonder how many times this week, this month, this year, we have not done the right thing because we were swayed by material blessings, by material, by wealth, by influence, by things that that the world had to offer, by pleasure. How many times have we done the wrong thing? And so I know all of us want to say, because the pastor's in the room, no, I wouldn't be swayed by that. I do the right thing. And I hope that's true, but I want you to be honest with yourself and maybe with some other people too. Haven't you been swayed by those things? Haven't you done the wrong thing when you knew what the right thing to do was, and but you knew that there was some kind of material wealth involved, or some kind of influence or authority that was being offered, or pleasure that you were going to get if you did the wrong thing? Certainly in my lifetime, I've done the wrong thing because of the promise of material wealth, influence, or pleasure. I don't want that to be my life anymore. I don't want that to be my life today, but that doesn't mean I'm not tempted toward it. So what do we really do? The last part is what Saul says about David in verse 9 true? He tells everybody he's and it's not in verse 9, is what Saul says in verse 8. He says, he lies in wait for me. You've helped him so that he lies in wait for me as he does today. So Saul is painting David out to be the enemy. He's painting David as the one who wants to kill Saul, but that's never been true. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in the next text, but that's never been true. The truth has always been that Saul is trying to kill David. And so even now, Saul's painting himself as the good guy who needs to defeat an enemy who is evil. And isn't that what we do when we're trying to justify the things that we've done that are wrong? So it's not even true what Saul's saying about David. David's running for his life. He's not lying in wait for Saul. He's not trying to kill him. And we're going to learn more about that in the next text. So I don't want to spoil all that, but it's not even true. Number 6, how did the priest respond to Saul's questioning according to verse 13 through 15? I love this because the priest that David went to says, this isn't the first time I've inquired of God for David. David's your son-in-law. He's like the most influential and popular in your whole family. If I inquired of God for him, I would have done that if I didn't think like how can you, why do you think that I was trying to help him against you? I thought he was on your side. Since when is he not on your side? And so that's how the priest responded. He said, I've done this time and time again as a way of helping the king because David's one of the leaders in his army. He's a captain of your own bodyguard. So there's this sense that the priest is innocent, and he truly is. Remember that David didn't even tell the priest what he was doing or why he was by himself. What did Saul do according to verses 16 through 17? So Saul didn't believe him and ordered their death. Told all his officials that were standing around, kill them, kill all of them. But the officials, what was the reaction of his officials in verse 17? They would not, it says the king's officials were unwilling to raise a hand to strike the priests of the Lord. So here, no matter what the wealth that was offered or the authority that was offered, the king's officials were not going to cross this line. They weren't going to kill. They may have pursued David. They may have pursued David thinking that this was a righteous pursuit, but they weren't going to kill the priests of the Lord. This crossed the line. This could not have been the will of God. And so they didn't do it. The last part says, what about Doug? So Doug, when the king ordered Doug in verse 18, it says he turned and struck them down. That day he killed 85 men who wore the linen ephod. In other words, were serving before the Lord. He put the whole town of Nob, the town of the priests, so all the women and children as well, to death. All the cattle, the donkey and sheep. Doug is slain. Doug maybe is not as influential as these other officials. Doug is desperate for the attention of the king. Doug is desperate for what the king has to offer. And whereas these officials would follow the king to some perhaps borderline pursuits because he's convinced them that these were righteous pursuits, when the king has clearly crossed the line, they're not going to do that. They use their own judgment. But what about Doug? Doug would do anything the king would ask. And I know we teach this across the board, adults, children, teenagers in our church. But let me just say this, that this is one of those things that I think is particularly understandable. I don't know that we have the same kind of pressure situations as adults. Maybe we do. We still have people that are pressuring us to do the wrong thing, but certainly as kids, as young people, we have peer pressure, and there are certain people, the people honestly that are secure enough in who they are, that are bold, that are going to become leaders. Um, I mean, for better or for worse, they become the leaders of the groups and they influence everybody else for better or for worse. If they end up influencing for the worse, then how many young people follow them because they're desperate for the recognition they can get by being liked by this guy or this girl, um, this person. If they like me, then it changes my whole life. Now there's going to be others that are confident in themselves and won't. They'll say, "No, I'm not going to do that. I mean, we're friends and all, but you've crossed the line here. I'm not going to do that with you. I'm not going to be on your side here." But here's Doug. Now I can tell you, as a young person, me, uh, I wasn't the leader in social groups that I should have been, that I could have been. If I had some confidence in myself, perhaps. I was a nerd, and I wanted to be liked so bad by certain people, that I probably would have crossed a lot of lines and probably did do things wrong just to be liked, and regret a lot of that. Try to teach my kids differently. Try to teach my kids that they don't have to be, because they can be influencers for the good. They can be the one that other people want to be liked by, and then use that for the good by doing right and influencing others to do right. But that's not what happened here with Saul and with Doug. So, number 7, where did the only remaining priest go when he escaped from Saul and Doug? He went straight to David. Here we go again. All these outcasts that escaped to David. Here goes the only remaining priest. How did David respond? This is interesting, because the first thing David said is, "I should have known." I mean, what was he going to do? Kill the guy or take him captive or what? What was he going to do with Doug? But he says, "I knew that guy was going to, I'm the reason your family's dead." And I don't know. The third question says, what was any of this really David's fault? And the answer is no, this was Saul's fault. This was Doug's fault. This was people who did the wrong thing. It wasn't on David. But at the same time, isn't it doesn't it tell you a lot about David's integrity, that he recognized the part that he played in it, even when what he was doing was the right thing? It broke his heart that these priests of God were gone, that this man's family was gone. And he said, um, "Stay here with me. The king's trying to kill me too. uh, we'll be in this together." Now, I don't know if the king's trying to kill me, I'm trying to get away from other people that the king's trying to kill. But if that person happens to be David, a mighty military leader who's got a bunch of other people on his side here, 400 men that are all disenfranchised by the kingdom as well, then maybe that's a good place to be. At least I'm not on my own to be killed. The last part says, "How do you respond in situations like this?" I just think David was not at fault, but are we sensitive enough to consider? Because sometimes we are at fault. Um, and are we sensitive enough to consider that? Or are we so arrogant as to think we're never at fault? And I like David's heart that we see here.